I'm the CEO of Central Carolina Community Foundation, and my colleague Erin Johnson is here with us as well from Central Carolina Community Foundation. We are pleased to once again be a funder of this study and this report. And one of the reasons we think it's so important is because we know that your strongest asset, the way that you're able to accomplish the important mission work you're able to accomplish, is through your team. It's through hiring and retaining strong, capable, mission-driven people. And to do that well means that you have to be market competitive in your salaries and your benefits. And so I wanted to share with you, just even on our end as a funder, I am not going to be able to stay on for this whole meeting. The reason I'm not going to be able to stay on for the whole meeting is I am actually going in. I think most of you are CEOs or board members. I'm going into a budget meeting. We're all in our budget cycles right now. And for that meeting, my preparation included not only the individual review processes for our team members. Most of you also do some kind of annual review process where you're looking internally at the success and performance of your team members. But it also included looking at a compensation study and making sure that not only from a salary perspective, but also when appropriate, a benefits and even incentive structure, that aligns with the field, with our region. Looking at the Midlands as a region is important. Also acknowledging, like zooming out a little bit too, and acknowledging that people can easily telecommute. So that's also part of what we have to think about now. So sometimes those benefits are also really important to make you more competitive. So we're doing that. And I think that it's really meaningful and valuable that Together SC now for many years has led this study. We should all be, grateful. I think we are. We're here. We should all be grateful that we have an association for our nonprofits that provides the kind of ongoing, consistent data like this that we can all use in our leadership with our board members and with each other. And I say with each other partly because as a funder, and Erin, I'm going to let you say a brief word about this, as well as the leader of our community impact team and the grant making. As a funder, like part of what we have to do as well is make sure that we are appropriately funding so that you can retain strong talent. So Erin, anything you want to add on that front from the funder and grant maker perspective?
No, I appreciate what you had to say, Georgia. No, I think on our side, I 100% agree that we fully support you all and the work you do, and recognize that your talent is oftentimes your biggest expense. And we expect that and we see that. And we appreciate all that you're doing. And so I really am grateful that you're here to learn a little bit more about this study and specifically how it looks in the Midlands. And thank you in advance as well for the fact that many of you completed this survey and helped contribute to this data. So I'm good on my end. So thank you, Georgia.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'll turn it back over to you so I can get on my budget meeting.
All right. Go have fun with budgets, Georgia.
Thank you. Thank you.
See you soon.
Bye.
Dan, you want to take it away?
Sure. Good morning-ish. I'm Kendra Stewart, and I'm director of the Riley Center. And we just want to thank you all for allowing us to do this project. We've really enjoyed it, and we feel very confident in the data and what you're going to hear today. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Shelby, who is our director of research and knows all of this data very well. So Shelby, Shumo.
Hi, thanks for having me here today. So before we jump in, I just wanted to start off by saying very, very briefly what the Riley Center is. So we're a public service organization here at the College of Charleston. Our goal and our mission really is to leverage all that the college has to offer to benefit kind of both the city here in Charleston, but also across the state. And so that is our mission. And so this is so directly tied to that mission. And so we appreciated getting to be involved with this project. So I wanted to just start off, and we'll talk today. I'm going to give an overview of the survey, just as a reminder for some who may have joined for some of our earlier conversations and presentations, and some who may not, just to give a reminder about the survey. And then I'll move through each of kind of the 4 big sections that are in the report. But just a reminder, on the survey overall. So it was administered from April 8th to May 16th, 2025. And to be included in the survey, there really were three kind of inclusion criteria. So first, you had to be a 501c3. You had to have at least one employee, and to be included in a report, you had to complete at least 40% of the survey. And so that was really to make sure we were kind of getting a full set of information about those organizations that are included. Overall, there were 320 organizations who completed the survey in our sample. And so we think that's a great sample of organizations across the state, but as we know, that is not a fully representative sample in all of South Carolina, but it provides really valuable information and insight into those. For the Midlands addendum, and this is kind of what we'll focus on more today, we looked at all of those organizations that noted that they were headquartered in one of the 11 Midlands counties. So to be clear, there are going to be some organizations that were in the survey more broadly that operate in the Midlands County as well. But we wanted to really focus on those who were kind of based in the Midlands counties. And so those 11 counties include Calhoun, Clarendon, Fairfield, Kershaw, Lee, Lexington, Newberry, Orangeburg, Richland, Saluda, and Sumner. And those are kind of the main 11, just so you have those in mind. And so when we looked at that kind of inclusion criteria for this addendum, to be clear, we had 62 organizations, and those 62 organizations reported having 613 reported employees. And so it's a meaningful, unsurprisingly, it's a meaningful percentage of kind of the overall survey sample. And we'll talk about some of the demographics of that today. Today, I'm going to focus primarily on the results of those 62 organizations, and I'll put them in the context where appropriate of the larger survey and a larger sample. But note that pretty much all the statistics and information I'm sharing today, there is also the equivalent information in the bigger survey about kind of the full sample, even though I may not focus on that as much today. So let's look at first, we'll start off kind of just talking about the demographics of those organizations, those 62 organizations that completed it. So on the left, you can see the types of sectors that those organizations are in. Human services was the most common sector in the full survey as well. So about 32% identified as primarily in human services, about a little under 20% in the public and social benefit, followed by health, education, environment, arts, and then an other category. On the right, you'll see some other key statistics about these organizations. So 74% said they were headquartered specifically in Richland County. So that's a large percentage, so we just want to keep that in mind. 42% had a budget of 1 to 5 million. So these would bucket them into the large organizations when we think about large versus small. And so that's roughly in line, but maybe slightly higher than the full survey. When we think about respondents, a little over half were the executive directors or CEOs. I note that mostly because one of the final sections we'll talk about is around employee sentiment. That sentiment is being rated through the perspective of the CEO or executive director. And so just that's important context there. On average, the median FTEs was 7. And then just reiterating kind of the first caveat I started off with a few minutes ago, right? This is a small sample of organizations. It provides interesting indications, but again, it may not be fully representative. So I just want to highlight that, especially as we get into some more of the details. And so now we looked at kind of what were the types of employees and how are they characterized among the Midlands regions. So 71% of employees were identified as female. Excuse me. 84% had a bachelor's or higher. 64. Oh, Lord. 64% had a bachelor's or higher. 41% were kind of in that 35 to 54 range. These were very consistent with the full sample. You can see the full sample numbers are below. But again, pretty consistent with what we found in the survey, kind of the general survey. The median or average employee is female, college educated, and in kind of the 30s and early 50s age range. One thing that was different, though, is when we looked at the racial composition of employees in the Midlands versus the full sample, we saw that on average, employees were a little bit less likely to identify as white and more likely to identify as Black or African American. The remainder percentages that you don't see were kind of other racial groups. And So we found, right, that the Midlands nonprofits employed about 11% more Black or African American staff than the statewide nonprofit average. And so that is kind of one difference that we saw in looking at the demographics of the employees at organizations based in the Midlands. So that's kind of big picture, the demographics. Relatively similar, although a little bit more racially diverse than kind of the sample overall across the state. After we looked at the demographics, the next big thing we looked at was salaries. And so on the screen now, you can see the median salary for all employees was about $52,000 a year. For director level employees, so these were positions in which had some form of director or higher, right, in their title, and the median salary was just under $82,000. And then you can see at the bottom, the median executive director salary was about $118,000. So when we look at these salaries in context with the rest of the sample, we see that all employees and director levels are slightly higher, but kind of relatively similar to the full sample of organizations who completed the survey. I will note that the executive director CEO salary for the Midlands region was meaningfully higher than the median salary executive CEO salary overall in the sample. That's also probably related to the median size of the organization was a little bigger. And so we know that organizations that are a little bigger tend to have higher salaries for their executive directors and CEOs. So it may have also been just kind of due to a little bit of differences in the size of the organizations that are kind of in this sample versus the larger sample. And so, but these are kind of the medians. I will note that in the full report, you can see the medians for all of the regions across the state for each of these different. So you can kind of compare and see also how that looks in different regions in the state. Our median salaries, we can't exactly compare apples to apples for the median salaries from the 2022 survey, which is the last time we did the compensation report, but we can compare for similar positions. And we've seen when we look at similar positions, we see salaries have risen by about 20% since 2022, which is great. The challenge, obviously, is that we all know inflation has also been high over this period, right? And so that eats into a bit of kind of those rises in salaries. And so it does seem like the salaries have outpaced inflation, which is wonderful to see. But obviously, unfortunately, inflation has eaten into some of those increases. And then next, we just wanted to highlight that in the report, we've included both for pretty much most of the most common positions, median salaries, and then the 25th to 75th percentile for those salaries. And so you can see a sample of those on the screen here. Excuse me. And so I just wanted to highlight that that's information that's in the report. You can see it for the Midlands addendum has it specifically for the Midlands, and the full report also has it for the Midlands for each of these positions, as well as statewide and as well as the other regions where there's enough sample size. Luckily, the Midlands has one of the higher sample sizes, so we have more information on the Midlands region in particular. And so these are the overall salaries. We also asked the respondents about some of their demographics, as we spoke about earlier. And so we looked at the demographics and the salaries together next to think about to what extent are we seeing any pay differences. And what we see on the screen now is that we're looking at pay differences by gender. First of all, at the top, you'll see male versus female for all employees. Here you'll see the gap, the gender gap, so the difference between male versus female. It's about $4,000, a little under $4,000, which is slightly smaller than in the full sample and is pretty small. So overall, among kind of all employees, the gender gap in the Midlands region is smaller than kind of the overall sample and relatively small overall. However, the bottom graph you'll see is the pay differences among director level employees. So these are going to be individuals who, again, have that director level or higher title. So your executive director would also be in this group. It's a pretty broad group, but you can see that when you look at male versus female here, excuse me, that there's a bigger gap. It's about $17,000 a year, the difference between male versus female. So the gender gap here at the director level is quite large. And it is a bit larger too than the overall sample, I'll note. Now, my caveat, we have 62 organizations. And so, right, it's hard to exactly put too much weight into this exact number. But I think noting that as you get more senior, it does seem that the gender gap seems to grow, does seem to be what is indicated in these results. That result was also seen among the full sample, but seems to be a bit higher kind of when looking here. And so it's just something to note that as seniority grows, sometimes the gender gap also seems to be growing. We also looked at gaps across race. And this had some interesting results, I'll note. So the top, you'll see the white versus African-American gap. You'll see it's pretty sizable among all employees. It's about 12,000 between white versus Black African-American employees among all employees. It's quite large, but it's also relatively in line with what we saw for the full sample among all employees. However, what's interesting is in the Midlands region, when we looked at white versus Black African-American director level employees, the gap actually flipped in that Black African-American director level employees in the Midland regions were actually paid higher on average than the white employees. It's by about $7,000 a year. Again, we have very small sample sizes, so I just want to highlight that. But it is interesting to see that where we saw the gender gap growing as seniority rose, it does not seem that the racial gap is growing in the same way. If anything, it seems to be decreasing meaningfully in the Midlands region. And that's different from the overall sample. So in the overall sample, we saw the racial gap maintained across these levels. That does not seem to be found in the same way in the Midlands region. And so we looked at kind of salaries overall in the context of the demographics. And the last thing we looked at salaries in the context was in the context of the cost of living. So there is a self-sufficiency standard that's produced kind of by the United Way organizations that estimate what is the annual salary that a family or an individual will need in different configurations in order to essentially meet their basic needs. And in the Midlands, and this is estimated for each of the different counties, we rolled those up into the regions, and we estimated that the self-sufficiency standard for a single adult in the Midlands is about $37,581 a year. And when we compared that to kind of the lowest paid salary at each of the organizations that completed the survey, we found that in the Midlands, about 40% of employees, their lowest paid employee, did not make more than that self-sufficiency standard for a single adult. This was slightly lower than the full South Carolina sample, so a little bit better, but still 40%. I will note though, when we looked at the median paid employee, so the median employee at most organizations does make more than the self-sufficiency standard. So the lowest paid employee, often at about 40% of organizations, does not make that single adult living wage, but the median paid employee typically does in the Midlands region. So that was the left. On the right, we also looked at the percentage of organizations who paid the median employee would be able to support a 4-person family, and this is on one income. And so for a 4-person family, the median, the self-sufficiency standard is about $87,000 a year. And most organizations do not pay high enough median salaries that could support a standard 4-person family on one income. This is pretty consistent with South Carolina sample, but just two different ways of kind of looking at salaries to think about them in the context of cost of living. So that's kind of going to complete our discussion around salaries. From here, I'm going to shift to benefits. So on the screen now, you see a list, there we go, of the benefits offerings. And you'll see the blue line represents the Midlands. So that's the percentage of organizations in the Midlands that offer that particular type of benefit. And then the orange line is going to be the percentage of the full sample of organizations that were completed the survey who noted that they offered that benefit. And you'll notice that for nearly all of the options, with the exception of parental leave and remote options, the blue line is larger than the orange line. So what does that mean? That means that overall, for most benefits, Midlands organizations tend to be more generous with their benefits than organizations outside of the Midlands, than the full sample overall. I'll note that Midlands organizations were slightly larger than organizations in the full sample overall. But even when we looked at comparing large organizations in Midlands and non-Midlands, and small organizations in Midlands and non-Midlands, this trend generally held. So I think generally, overall, we can say that the Midlands organizations did tend to be a bit more generous with benefits, particularly around health, dental, vision, retirement, than organizations headquartered outside of the Midlands region. Like in the full sample, though, we do see large gaps between large and small organizations. So smaller organizations are those going to be with budgets that were under $1 million, and large organizations are going to be those with budgets above $1 million. The teal or lighter color is going to be larger organizations on the screen, and the darker blue will be that smaller organizations. And you can see for most benefits, particularly retirement, paid leave, vision, dental, health, that the lighter blue, which represents the large organizations, is meaningfully higher than the smaller organizations. And this just reiterates what we often know, that the large organizations typically can be more generous with their benefits than smaller organizations. I want to highlight two areas where that trend does not hold. The first is in the middle, which is parental leave. Parental leave is pretty much consistent across small and large organizations in their offerings. Although I will note that we think in the future it'll be interesting to kind of dig into that question more to get a little more specific on what people are offering. The other one that is also reversed is remote work options. And so I thought it was interesting that Georgia mentioned telecommuting at the beginning of our call as a way and type of benefit to consider. And what you see here is that the smaller organizations are actually more likely, significantly more likely, to offer remote work options than the smaller organizations. And so it's kind of interesting that that may be a way that smaller organizations may be thinking about offering a benefit that is a little bit less maybe potentially costly than offering health insurance might be, but still try to kind of give their employees an additional kind of benefit to continue coming to be part of the organization. So in this last section, I'm going to flip to employee sentiment. And so what you see on the screen now is the percentage of organizations who noted that they agreed or strongly and found it nice or agreed that the employee retention was happening well, employee productivity was high, and employee morale was strong. The teal color here is going to be the Midlands, and the orange is going to be the full sample. First thing to note, right, more than 50% of organizations feel good about employee retention, productivity, and morale. You'll notice, though, especially in the employee retention and productivity, that the Midlands blue line is a little bit lower than the full sample. And so that just indicates that there might be a little bit less optimism around retention and productivity, particularly among organizations in the Midlands regions. We don't have information on why that might be from the survey, but just noted kind of that trend. It's not a huge difference, but they are non-zero differences. And so we just wanted to highlight that. And so I just wanted to now kind of summarize some of the big takeaways, right? Overall, consistent with the full survey, Midlands nonprofit employees are primarily female, white, and college educated. However, Black and African American employees make up a more significant portion of the Midlands workforce than the statewide sample. Salaries for similar positions are up about 20%, although unfortunately inflation is also up significantly, although not to that same level. And we see a wider pay gap among director level employees in the Midlands region, but a smaller, actually reversed pay gap among racial groups. A significant portion, so about 40% of organizations don't pay the lowest paid employee enough to support a single adult without children. And about 86% have median salaries that are insufficient to support a 4-person family on a single income. On a positive, really positive note, the Midlands nonprofits offer more generous benefits overall than statewide sample, although we see large gaps among small and large organizations. And the other thing I'll highlight there, right, is that the remote work options, though, buck that trend. It goes the other way. The smaller organizations are more likely to offer those than large. And finally, that more than half of Midland organizations report higher retention, productivity, and morale, although their optimism is a little bit lower than their peers statewide. And so with that, I wanted to open it up to questions.
Aaron Johnson asked a question a moment ago. Well, I think you answered this though. How does the pay equity compare with the statewide sample? Any other questions from folks?
I have a question for the folks on the Zoom chat. One of the things that we've been doing since this study was released, and working with Shelby and Kendra, is what ideas do you have for how we could get this more widely disseminated to members of your board and to other decision makers who, in many organizations, help set the tone for salaries? The finance committee, the treasurer, the board chair, working with EDs and staff. We're still really looking for ways to be able to get this information into their hands. I will say that some of you have already downloaded the full study and now see this version of the study that's Midlands specific. Have said anecdotally that you are planning to share this with your board. But again, we don't have direct contact with your boards most of the time. So we don't have your board chair's name and email to be able to share it with her or him. But we would love any ideas and suggestions you have to get this information out so that when we do this study again, we'll start to see more forward progress in regard to closing some of the gaps that exist across the board, but especially super focused on the gender gap, especially at that ED level. That's very, very interesting to us in a kind of disturbing way. And then also the racial gap that exists and benefits. And so Together SC has been very focused on offering more benefits like a retirement plan, like the health plan, vision, and dental, to try to keep that affordable and accessible so more people would have it. But it's still kind of shocking how many folks don't have access to a plan, and you see that in these study results. So if you have ideas or questions, you can put them in the chat, but you can also just contact us at Together SC. Just drop me a line at karen@togethersc.org. I would love to get your ideas on this, because I feel like the more people who know about these gaps and are in positions of influence to help change that, the better off we will be as a sector. So.
Was there any thoughts or consideration about how some of this compares to for-profit or manufacturing, like all those, any other kind of sector, as well as nonprofits outside of South Carolina?
I think you're on mute, Shelby.
There we go. Sorry. We looked at it specifically more on the benefit side than the compensation side, because frankly, there's more labor statistics data that does that. And specifically, we looked at organizations that were kind of a similar size in the for-profit. The benefits looked fairly in line, or maybe even better among some of the respondents to the survey. And that it was across health and dental and vision areas like that. And so overall, kind of compared to the for-profit on the benefit side, it seems like in line, if not better. It's harder to exactly look on the compensation side on what is kind of the right comparison points. And so we didn't include that as much in the full survey, but we did, or in our full report, but we were pleasantly happy to see that the benefits looked pretty commensurate for organizations of similar size, right? And we know for smaller for-profit organizations also face similar types of challenges in offering benefits.
And we would be happy to do that. The challenge, of course, is the availability of the data. We're hoping down the road that some of the other states, there really wasn't any comparable data around surrounding states. Like a couple of states had done studies, but they were out west where we didn't, feel like Minnesota would be a great comparison to South Carolina. But I don't know, maybe that is the case. And, that's always stuff that we're open to doing in the future. So, any feedback you have, that would be great. And I know letting like Karen and Ben know too, if there are things you would like to see, we're very open to do that. But we only did it in the report with ones where we felt like the data was very reliable. Thank you for that.
Interestingly, that we just received notes from the association in Tennessee as well as in Kentucky that they are both looking to do a compensation and benefits study based on hearing that we had just completed one in South Carolina, and they realized that it had been a really long time since they had done that. So our vision is to do this consistently. We don't want there to be 10-year gaps between data points. So in a perfect world, we would do this every few years so that we have a really great trend line and we can look at the study that was done just a few years ago in 2023, and then look at this study that was completed in 2025, and just continue to build the data points so that we see forward progress. Anything else? Everybody's quiet today.
I actually have a question about salary as a function of the budget as a whole. I think our particular organization gets hung up on percentage of the budget that gets spent on salary versus programs. And I'm curious as to if there was any information brought through this survey that addresses that.
That's interesting. I do not think we looked explicitly at that, but I think that's something that would be interesting to do in the future as we collect. It would obviously not be a perfect because we kind of have ranges on the budgets, but thinking about that percentage, given that's a similar kind of item that we've heard others talk about as kind of important to boards, especially in budgeting, I think that could be another item that we'd want to add and think about in the future.
Thank you.
I think it goes along with that, though, Jessica, is that I strongly encourage you to include, and it's a different way of looking at it. If you have program staff, the cost of their salary is a program cost. Because if you didn't have that program, you wouldn't need that staff person. So if it's any cost that's related to doing those programs, regardless if it's a person or a building or whatever, that is a program cost if you need it to do that program.
Thank you.
We're ahead of schedule, folks. Wow, this never happens. We might give you back part of your day. Unless there are any other questions, you can put them in the chat. Or again, feel free to reach out to us after, and we can share any questions that you have back with Shelby and Kendra and see if we can get you some answers. But again, I would like to just thank everyone, as Erin noted, first for participating too. We couldn't get this data if we didn't have a strong sample statewide and then in the Midlands region. So that was really, really important. We don't collect this data and share it just so that you have it as an FYI. We really hope you use it. So please download a copy of the full study so that you have it handy and you can look at it. similar to what Georgia said, we definitely look at it at Together SC to understand if everyone on our team is being compensated appropriately and within the ranges that are outlined in the compensation study. And as we've created a couple of new positions recently, the first place we've gone is to this compensation study to get an understanding of what the median salary should be. And just again, trying to always push to make sure that we're providing good benefits and a livable wage and a strong salary to be competitive. We're certainly in challenging times right now, and the last thing that any of us would like is to lose a really valuable team member that you really love and love their performance and love their fit in your culture, and have them leave to go to another nonprofit or to go to for-profit because of salary or because of a lack of a benefit. So it definitely is a competitiveness issue, and we want to keep the pipeline strong.
There are a couple of questions that are there, one from Elizabeth and one from Craig. I don't know if y'all want to address that.
Can we make a one-page summary of the study? Yes, we can do that. Great idea. And Taylor said
Craig,
we're
do you
using
think
it.
it's helpful to have a Midlands specific one or just statewide? Because statewide would be more of a representative sample probably, but what do you think would be most helpful for that?
No, I was intrigued by your point about sharing things with the board. But the
Mhm.
problem is when you give some long document to the board, they don't have time to read it. So
Mhm.
a one-page sort of executive summary with maybe just what the averages are for the Midlands, Aaron. I think it's best to just compare what's going on in the Midlands.
Mhm.
I think for the board, for the engineer types who just want to see some numbers, percentages, that's really what I'm thinking about. And then, is it adequate pay? Some of that when you start to get into a little more murky area with the board. They just want to know, does this compare with other jobs in the area? Not can you support a family of four or whatever. Now, if you can squeeze those into one pager, great, because it is good information, but I just some basic comparisons, and the boards assign CEO salaries. So for all of us, that would be one where that would be useful for most boards to look at because they probably don't have a clue as to what CEOs are paid around the state, much less in the Midlands. So I just think a one pager, if you're serious about getting the information out, and originally it was like if you filled out the survey, which we did, then you can get the free report or whatever. You need to make the report free now. Get out the information because we're past that point. Get the information out, and I will sell it to the board. I will get it out to the board if I have something that's presentable.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
There is a one page, but I think it could be a little bit more robust because I did download the executive summary. I think it just had a couple data points, but I think some of the specific things that Shelby brought up in the presentation wasn't on that. I think that was some of the really helpful things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we could do something that's almost like infographic style, that's just very visual and just has a couple of key data points. But to your point, is all on one page. So it's super easy. It's downloadable as a PDF. You can print it out, you can share it. And I'd like to suggest that we do one for the Midlands so that all of you who participated in that one have it. And then we'll do a second one that's statewide for all the other nonprofits in the other counties, so that they have something like a tool like that too. And you're right, like the wider we can disseminate it, the better.
And Karen, we'll share this PowerPoint with you afterwards if you want to share it with anybody as well.
Thank you. Awesome. Any other questions in there?
Elizabeth had one about guidance or technical assistance being offered to nonprofit leaders to help them understand where they are with employee salaries versus where they want to be in terms of increasing compensation. I don't know if that you mean kind of like an audit, Elizabeth, and then thinking through how you can strategically get to where you hope to be.
Yeah, having been in the nonprofit space for 10 years now, there's I've been in positions where the executive director said, it's not in the budget. We don't know how we'd possibly do that. And then it's a bit of a slap to the face as, being a lower paid employee of like, we're not even close to the median salary range. Is the goal just for us to be barely living? Do you want me to stay at this organization? And really kind of questioning your value. And that's not, to throw any of those people under the bus, but I really did see it as like, perhaps you really don't know how to get there. Like perhaps there really there isn't a strategy in place of how to better pay your employees. Because I mean, one of the worst things is having a lot of turnover, because you do lose really great talent and people feel like they cannot stay in a position financially. And I sometimes wonder about what great work could be done. And so, yeah, that's where that question comes from. Is it actually, supporting those leaders and whoever is in leadership, right? Like whoever's making those decisions to be able to get to that point. If it's really a goal for you to get to even a median salary place, or, do you want to be bumping up on the higher levels of salary? I mean, that'd be ideal, right? Like we want our people to be well compensated for their work and feel valued in that way. Even though we know there's never really a number we can put on it. But yeah, so that's where that's coming from.
No, I love that. I think this is something I want to put out to the consultant collaborative. We've got a lot of smart people. We've got 150 consultants that work exclusively with nonprofits. I think there's some generalized guidance that's in the new guiding principles that we released in January, just again, talking about that, but you're absolutely right. What is the plan? what are the action steps to actually move individual employees? And then collectively, if you look at this study and see that, say you're an employer with 8 FTEs and that all 8 are not where they need to be. They're not in range. They're not close, as you said. To introduce the concept of being an employer of choice, right? Being so valuable and being so respected and paying such a competitive wage that people are knocking down your door wanting to actually work at your nonprofit. I think that's something that our consultant collaborative could tackle. We're working with a company right now that's going to be offering some scenario planning around budgeting and finance. That's going to be happening in the fall. And I'd like to put this in front of them as well as some of those other consultants to see if we could create some kind of rubric, if we could create some guidance as you asked for, that then we could share out with everybody to say like this is how it's done. Don't just give it lip service, or don't just say like, oh, we wish we could, but we just can't afford to do that. Like this is a serious issue that needs to be taken up by the finance committee of the board of directors to say we're going to lose valuable people, and losing people is costly for any organization, for profit or nonprofit. Work does not get done. Mission does not get accomplished. Programs suffer. And then the people being served by those programs suffer. So trying to quantify that, I think, would be a really, really interesting exercise. So I would like to put that very challenge out to our consultants, see if they could come back with something. We'll keep you posted.
Yeah, that'd be lovely. I mean, I love seeing when data isn't sitting on a dusty shelf or like stuck somewhere in a hard drive. And I think that kind of next step of like, okay, and now what, right? Like now that you've seen this data, then now what? So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you very much, everyone. Shelby, Kendra, thank you as always for your great work. We appreciate you. Erin, thank you, and the whole team at Central Carolina Community Foundation, and everyone for attending today. Really appreciate your time. Hope this was helpful, and you're going to see a few action steps from the Together SC team in terms of some one-pagers, and then hopefully some very practical, technical guidance on how to get boards to sort of help make those moves. So thank you very much.